In the last class, we discussed the research approaches and the significance of research. And in this class, we discuss the research methodology for the semester 5 uh, honors in economics, that is the applied econometrics. So today we will discuss the research methods versus methodology, especially all of the procedures or techniques used to do research can be categorized as research methods. As a result, research methods or techniques refers to the procedure that researchers employ when they conducting research. In other words, research methods refers to all of the procedures utilized by the researcher to investigate his or her research problem because because the goal of research, especially applied research, is to find out a solution to a specific problem. The accessible data and the unknown parts of the problem must be linked in order for a solution to be attainable. With this in mind, research methodologies can be divided into three categories. One, the methods dealing with data collecting are included in the first group. When the data already supplied is insufficient to arrive at the needed solution, these methods will be applied. The second group of statistical procedures includes those that are used to build links between data and unknowns. The third set of approaches comprises of those that are used to assess the accuracy of the obtained results. Now, we have three types of the research. One is the library research, field research, and laboratory research. Library research basically analysis of historical record, analysis of documents, non-participant direct observations, and participant observations. Library research basically includes analysis of historical records, analysis of documents. Analysis of historical records means the recording of notes, content analysis, doing tape and filming, and analysis. Then the statistical complications analysis of documents includes statistical compilations and manipulations, reference, abstract guides, content analysis. Whereas the field research has several methods: non-participant, direct observation, participant observation, mass observations, mail questionnaire, opinionary, personal interview, focus interview, group interview, telephone survey, case study, and life history. And the laboratory research includes small group study of random behavior, play, and role analysis. Non-participant direct observations includes observational behavior of scales, use of scorecards, etc. Participant observations, interactional recording, possible use of tape, recorders, photographic techniques. Mass observations includes recording mass behavior, interview using, etc. Mail questionnaire includes identification of social and economic background of respondents through mailing. Opinionary use of attitude scales, projective techniques, etc., etc. Personal interview uses a detailed schedule with open and closed question. Focused interview focuses includes interviewer focuses attention upon a given experience and its effects. And similarly, group interview, telephone survey, case study, life history, and laboratory research basically use of audio visual recording devices, use of other observers. And the research methodology basically a research technique is a method for solving a research problem in a mathematical manner. It can be thought of as a science that studies how scientific research is carried out. Researcher must not only understand how to create specific index or tests, calculate the mean, mode, median, standard deviation, or chi-square, and apply specific research techniques. But they must also understand which of these methods or techniques are relevant and which are not, and what they mean and indicate and why. Researchers must also be aware of the assumptions that under in particular methodologies, as well as the criteria by which they can determine whether certain techniques and processes are appropriate for a specific situation and which are not. All of this implies that the researcher must create his methodology or his or her methodology for his problem, as it may differ from one to the next. For example, when you are designing a building, an architect must carefully assess the position of the doors, windows, and ventilators, and or why you employ certain materials and not others, and so on. Suppose you were making a cup of tea. You were asking to the customer or your relatives whether they will take sugar in the tea. Someone said that I will not take sugar in my cup of tea because already I am suffering from the sugar disease. So there is a motive why you don't use sugar in a school of cup of tea, but you are using the sugar, another cup of tea, who are not suffering from sugar disease. So in this case, you can understand the motive why you are not using the sugar in a cup of tea, or why you are using sugar in a cup of tea. That is the motivation comes from the sugar disease. So similarly, in research, the scientist must subject research decision to scrutiny before implementing them. He must clarify exactly what decisions he chooses and why he chooses them, so that they can be examined by others as well. Thus, when we talk about research methodology, we do not just talk about the research methods. We also consider the logic behind the methods we use in the context of our research study, and explain why we are using one method or technique over another, so that research findings can be evaluated by the researchers or others. When we discuss research methodology in relation to a research problem, we usually get answers to questions like why a research study was conducted, how the research problem was defined, how and why the hypothesis was formulated, what data was collected, what method was used, why a particular technique of data analysis was used, and a slew of other questions. So we should differentiate between research and scientific method. Here we will discuss the research and scientific method. As previously said, we said that research is defined as an investigation of the nature, causes, and consequences of any particular set of circumstances. So you can understand that what is the research. We already discussed it in details in class 1, tutorial 1. This was the first class that comprises in a sentence that once again I am saying that double inverted when an investigation of the nature, causes, and consequences of particular set of circumstances, whether these conditions are experimentally controlled or recorded as they occur. The scientific method is defined as the pursuit of truth based on logical reasons. Science's ideal goal is to develop a systematic interconnection of the facts. That is, interconnection of the facts means the equation of the child is intercorrelated with the equation of the father, because in the developing nations, father's equation is an important determinant of the child's equation. That implies the second generation's educational attainment depends on the first generational educational attainment. But in developed nations, this is very low because the infrastructure development in the developed countries much more progressive, so that the interdependence between the generational equation, employment, income does not matter in the developed nations. So examination, observation, logical arguments from established postulates, and the combination of these three in varied proportions are all used in the scientific method to accomplish this ideal. However, the following order concerning various steps provides a useful procedural guidelines, that is regarding the research process. The research process includes several steps. First step is the formulating the research problem. Sorry. So this is the research process. The research process includes, first you should define the research problem, review concepts and theoretical framework, then review previous research findings in which you are interested to research, and then you should formulate a hypothesis which will be different from others who already contribute in this regard, and then design the research, including sample design, and then collect data and execute data and arrange data in a software, then analyze data and test your hypothesis. Already you have to assume your null hypothesis, and then interpret and your results and report. This is the simple research process. Next, we will discuss elaborately which research process we should require to follow. Then the formulating the research problem as a first step. There are two types of research problem: those which relates to states of nature and those which relates to relationship between variables. The researcher must first identify the problem he wishes to investigate. That is, the general area of interest or feature of a subject matter that he wishes to investigate. The problem may be expressed in broad terms at first, and then any uncertainties, if any, about the situation could be clarified before a working formulation of the problem can be built up. The practicality of a certain solution must be assessed. The transformation of a broad topic into a specific research problem is thus the first stage in any scientific investigation. Formulating the research problem entails two steps. The first, a full comprehension of the situation, and then, from an analytical standpoint, rephrasing it into understandable terms. The greatest way to grasp the topic is to discuss it with one's own colleagues or with others who are knowledgeable. Suppose you can discuss your idea with your supervisor or with your professor of your department about the subject you are thinking that you want to investigate, whether any truth come out from your investigation or not. In an academic setting, the researcher can seek assistance from a guide or your professor, or who is usually an experienced guy who is familiar with a variety of research problems. At the same time, the researcher must review all accessible materials to familiarize himself with the chosen problem. You can look at the two categories of literature. One is the conceptual literature about the concept and theories, and the empirical literature about previous studies that is similar to the one he is proposing. The researcher will be able to identify his own study problem in a meaningful context after learning what data and other resources available for the operational purposes as a result of this review. Following that, the researcher rephrases the topic in analytical or operational terms, attempting to be as specific as feasible. The task of creating or identifying a research problem is the most crucial phase in the research process. The problem to be researched must be clearly defined in order to distinguish relevant data from irrelevant data. However, extreme caution must be exercised in this context, that you should ensuring the impartiality and veracity of the problems of the background facts. The declaration of the purpose is crucial because it specifies the data that will be collected, the relevant data features, the relationships that will be investigated, the methodologies that will be utilized in this exploration, and the format of the final report. If there is any relevant terminology, they should be defined in conjunction with the work of articulation the problem. In fact, problem formulation frequently follows a progressive pattern, with each formulation becoming more particular than the one before it, is on being described in more analytical terms, and is becoming more feasible in terms of available data and resources. Then we come the second stage of your research, that is the extensive literature review. It is a very important part of your research proposals, that it is required of a research worker writing a Ph.D. thesis or the undergraduate level dissertation to create a synopsis of the topic and submit it for the approval to the specific committee or research board or to your research supervisor. At this point, the researcher should do through literature review on the subject. The first place to look for this information is in abstracting and indexing journals, as well as published and unpublished bibliographies, depending on the nature of the problems, academic journals, conference proceedings, government reports, books, and other sources must be used here. It's important to note that one source will lead to another during this process. If there are any previous studies that are similar to the one at hand, they should be thoroughly examined, and this at this point, an excellent library will be of tremendous assistance to the researchers. Then we will come to the developing of working hypothesis. So first you do the formulating the research problem, then you do the extensive literature review, then you will develop your hypothesis. So following a through review of the literature, the researcher should state the working hypothesis, or hypothesis in plain language and simple language. A working hypothesis is a hypothesis that is made with the intention of elucidating and testing its logical or empirical consequences. As a result, the manner in which research hypothesis are formed is critical, as they serve as the research focus point. They also have an impact on the way tests must be run in data analysis, as well as the quality of data required for the study. The formulation of working hypothesis is critical in almost all sorts of research because it must be tested. Hypothesis should be highly particular and limited to the piece of research at hand. The hypothesis purpose is to guide the researcher by defining the research field and keeping him on track. It sharpens his thoughts and concentrates his attention on the most critical aspects of the situation. It also specifies the sort of data requested and the data analysis procedure to be employed. How does one go about developing working hypotheses? The answer is the following. You can discussion with colleagues and experts about the problem, its origin, and the objective in seeking a solution. Examination of data and records, if available, concerning the problems of possible trends, and the review of similar studies in the area you are thinking to do, investigate all the studies on similar problems already defined by other researchers, already explained by other researchers. Exploratory personal investigation, which involves original fields interviews or a primary survey on a limited scale with interested parties and individuals with a view to secure greater insight into the practical aspects of the problem. Then we will preparing the review design. The review design, the researchers will be required to produce a research design which will define the conceptual structure within which research will be conducted. After the study challenge has been formulated in unambiguous words, the preparation of such a plan allows for the most efficient study feasible, giving the most knowledge. To put it another way, the purpose of the study design is to allow for the collection of relevant evidence with the least amount of survey effort, time, and money possible. But how all these can be achieved depends mainly on the research proposal. Research proposal may be grouped into four categories: that exploration, description, diagnosis, and experimentation. The experimentation, if the objective of the research study is to explore a flexible research design that allows for the consideration of many distinct facts of an issue, is regarded appropriate when the goal is to accurately describe a scenario or a relationship between variables. However, the base design is one that minimizes bias and increases the dependability of data collected and analyzed. So first of all, the experimental and non-experimental hypothesis testing are two types of research design. Informal design, such as before and after without control, after only with control, before and after with control. and formal designs such as complete randomized design, randomized block design, etc., etc., are available, from which the researcher must choose one of his own project, own dissertation, or for his thesis. The evaluation of the following factors is frequently included in the construction of research design that is suited for a specific research problem. So now the research problem is the means of obtaining the information, the availability and skills of the researchers and staff, explanation of the way in which selected means of obtaining information will be organized, and the reasoning leading to the selection, the time available for research and the cost factor relating to research, that is the finance available for the purpose. Second is the determining the sample design. The fifth stress. That is, the sample design, how to do, you have to already study it in first semester, second semester, the statistical method. That is, you already knows the definition of population and sample. We are once again defining these in the determining sample design step. The universe or population is made up of all the elements under investigation in any subject of inquiry. A census inquiry is a full enumeration of all the objects in the population. It is reasonable to assume that when all of the objects are covered, there is no element of chance left, and the highest accuracy is reached. In practice, however, this may not be the case. Even the tiniest element of bias in such an investigation will grow as the number of observations grows. Furthermore, except through a resurvey or the use of sample checks, there is no means to check the elements of bias or its extent. Furthermore, this type of investigation takes a lot of time, money, and effort. So the researcher must decide how to pick a sample or a sample design. So you have a problem to collect a whole population, or the whole population or whole universe. So you should determine a sample design as it commonly known. It otherwise, a sample design is a predetermined approach to acquiring a sample from a specific population before any data is ever gathered, and from the sample we can explain, or infer the objective of your motive and the objective of your research. As an example, a sample design is a strategy to choose 12 of cities, 200 drug stores in a specific style. There are two types of sample: probability sample and non-probability samples. Each element in the probability sample has a known chance of being included in the sample, but non-probability samples do not allow the researcher to estimate this likelihood. Non-probability samples are those based on convenience sampling, judgment sampling, and quota sampling procedures, whereas probability samples are those based on simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, and clusters or area sampling. The following is a quick random of the most essential sample designs we are deliberating here. So first of deliberate sampling. Purposive or non-random probability sampling is another term for deliberate sampling, sorry. This sampling method entails the deliberate or purposeful selection of specific universe units to form a sample that represents the entire universe. Convenience sampling refers to the selection of demographics elements for inclusion in a sample based on their accessibility. If researchers wants to control data from gasoline customer, for example, he can choose a set number of stations and conduct interviews there. This is an illustration of convenience sample of gasoline purchasers. When the population is not homogeneous, such an approach can sometimes produce severely skewed findings. So in judgment sampling, on the other hand, the researcher judgment is employed to select objects that he deems to be representative of the population. Yet judgment sample of college students, for example, could be obtained to gauge attitude to a new teaching style when the goal is to develop hypotheses rather than generalize to wider populations. Judgment sampling is typically utilized in qualitative research. Simple random sampling. This sort of sampling is also known as chance sampling or probability sampling because each item in the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample, and each of the possible samples in the case of finite universe has an equal chance of being chosen. So, to do so, we choose a random starting position and then follow a systematic strategy to work our way through the table. We may begin in the fourth row, second column, and to work our way down to the column to the table bottom, etc. Next is the systematic sampling. These show a most practical method of sampling in some cases to choose every 15th name on a list of every 10th house on one side of a street and so on. This sort of sampling is referred to as a systematic sampling. Randomness is frequently incorporated into this type of sampling by selecting the unit with which to begin with random numbers when the sample frame is in the form of a list. This approach is useful. Then the stratified sampling. If the population from which the sample is to be taken is not homogeneous, stratified sampling is used to generate a representative sample. The population is stratified into a number of non-overlapping subpopulation or strata. The sample items are chosen from each stratum using these procedures. If the items chosen from each stratum are chosen using simple random sampling, the overall technique is known as stratified random sampling, which includes stratification first and then simple random sample. Then we comes to the quota sampling, and these are very less useful of this quota sampling. The cost of taking random from individual strata is often so high in stratified sampling that interviewers are merely given quotas to fill from various strata, where the actual selection of the items for sample led to the interviewer's discretion. And this is referred to as quota sampling. The size of quota for each stratum is roughly proportional to the population size of that stratum. So the next is a cluster sampling or area sampling. This is the last. Cluster sampling involves groupings the population and then selecting groupings or cluster for inclusion in the sample rather than individual parts. Let's say a department store wants to sample its credit card customers. Okay. Uh, when the overall geography area of interest happens to be large, area sampling is commonly used to conjunction with the cluster sampling. We divide the overall region into number of smaller non-overlapping areas, sometimes referred to as geographical cluster, and then randomly select a number of these smaller areas with all units in these small areas included in the sample. Next is the multi-stage sampling. This is the extension of the cluster sampling concept. This method is intended for large-scale queries over a vast geographic area, such as a whole country. The initial stage of multi-stage sampling may consist of selecting large primary sampling units such as states, districts, towns, and lastly, specific households within towns. The sampling approach is termed as multi-stage random sampling. Then is the sequential sampling. Is the last sequential sampling. This is more complicated sample design in which the final sample choice is chosen by mathematical decisions based on information gathered as the survey advances rather than being fixed in advance. Thus, research design is commonly used in the context of statistical quality control as part of an acceptance sampling planning. In practice, in the last conclusion, in practice, several of the above mentioned sampling methods may be utilized in the same study, which is known as mixed sampling. It should be noted that in most cases, random sampling should be used in order to reduce bias and estimate sample error. Purposive sampling, on the other hand, is regarded as advantageous when the universe is tiny and the known aspect of its needs to be investigated in depth. There are several circumstances in which sample designs other than random sampling may be preferable for reasons such as convenience and the cost. The researchers must decide on the sample design to be employed, taking into account the nature of inquiry and other relevant consideration. So next is the collecting the data. How to collect the data. When dealing with any real world situation, it is common to discover that the data available is insufficient, necessitating, necessitating the collection of more applicable data. There are various methods for gathering relevant data, each of which differs significantly in terms of cost, time, and other resource available to the researcher. Primary data might be gathered through an experiment or a survey. When a researcher conducts an experiment or survey, he takes note of some quantitative measurements or data, or with which he tests the truth of his hypothesis. In the case of survey, however, data can be gathered in any of the following ways. The second, the observation. This strategy entails gathering data through the investigator's own observations rather than questioning respondents. The information gathered is relevant to what is currently occurring and is unaffected by respondents' prior behavior or future plans or views. This technology is unquestionably costly, and the information it provides is also extremely limited. As a result, this strategy is ineffective as investigation involving big samples. Through personal interviews. Through personal interviews, the investigator follows a strict method and seeks answer to a series of preconceived questions. This form of data collection is usually done in a systematic manner, and the outcome is heavily reliant on the interviewer's ability. Next. Next through schedule. Okay, the enumerators, through telephone interviews. This method of data entails calling the respondents directly on the phone by mailing of questionnaire. If this form of survey is used, the researchers and respondents will come into contact. Respondents are mailed questionnaires with instruction to return them once they have completed them. And thorough schedules. The enumerators are appointed and trained using this manner. They are given schedules that include pertinent questions. This enumerator delivers these schedules to respondents. Enumerators fill out schedules based on the responses made by the respondents to collect data. In terms of this strategy, a lot of depends on the ability of the enumerators. Field checks on the back of enumerators on a regular basis may help to ensure honest labor. Okay, and then this is The researcher should choose one of these data collection methods based on the nature of the investigation, the inquiry's purpose, and scope. Financial resources also you should keep in your mind, the available time and the required level of accuracy. Next is the seven, the execution of the project. The project execution is a crucial element in research process. If the project is carried out correctly, the data that will be obtained will be insufficient and reliable. The researchers should ensure that the project is completed in timely and systematic manner. Data can be easily machine purposed if the survey is done using the structured question and possible replies could be coded in such a setting, or which generally follow if the data is to be obtained through interviewers, suitable selection and turning of the interviewers should be made. Instruction booklets that clearly explain the job of interviewers or investigators at each step may be used to provide the training. Field checks should be conducted on a regular basis to ensure that the interviewers are performing their duties honestly and efficiently. In order to keep the survey as realistic as feasible, keep a close eye out for unpaneled factors. This is, in other words, indicates that procedures should be made to ensure that the survey is statistically controlled and that the data collected meets the predetermined accuracy criteria. If some of the respondents refuse to comply, some appropriate techniques for dealing with this situation should be devised. Analysis of data. The following the collection of the data. Next, you should analyze the data. The researchers moves on to the work of analysis. It data analysis necessities of a number of closely connected procedures, including the creation of categories, the application of these categories to raw data via coding, tabulation, and statistical judgments. Next, the hypothesis testing. This is very important part of your research. Following the above mentioned data analysis, the researcher is in position to test his predetermined hypothesis. He had do the facts support the theories or do they contradict them? This is a common question that needs to be answered while testing the theories. And the generalization and interpretation. If a hypothesis is verified and confirmed multiple times, the researchers may be able to generalize and that is construct a theory. In fact, if the true worth of research is in its ability to arrive at certain generalization, if the researcher does not have a hypothesis to begin with, he can try to explain his findings using a theory. It's referred to as interpretation. Then the preparation of the report or the thesis or your dissertation. The following points should be kept in your mind when you're writing the report, dissertation, or thesis. First, the layout of the report should be as follows. The preliminary pages, the title, and the date should be appear on the first page of the report, followed by the acknowledgement. When you will write followed by the acknowledgement and the forward. So the table of contents should be followed by a list of tables and, if applicable, a list of graphs, charts throughout the report. You can read. Then you will write down the introduction. Introduction, should contain a clearly statement of the objective of research and explanation of the methodology adopted in accomplishing the research. The scope of study, along with various limitations, should be as well as stated in this part. Summary of findings. After introduction, there would appear statement of findings and recommendations in non-technical language. If the findings are extensive, they should be summarized. Main report. The main body of the report should be presented in logical sequence and broken down into readily identifiable sections. Conclusion. Towards the end of the main text, researcher should again put down the results of his research clearly and precisely. In fact, it is in the final summarizing of. At the end of the report or dissertation, appendix should be enlisted in respect of all technical data. Appendix means such as graph, such as results you are not interested to give in or it is not highly necessary to give in your research in your main report or main report body. So you can give it in your appendix and list of books, journals, etc., etc. Reports should be written in concise. Reports or thesis should be concise, not a elaboration. Objective of the style in simple language, not in a critical language, critical expressions. So you should write down your research in a simple language, in a simple quotation, just in simple. Okay, charts and illustration in the main report should be used only if they present the information more clearly of your research. And calculated confidence limit must be mentioned, and the various constraints experienced in conducting research operations may as well be stated. The criteria of good research. Now the last of this class is the criteria of good research. There are 7 criteria of a good research. First of all, the purpose of research should be clearly defined and common concepts of be used. The research procedure used should be described in sufficient detail to permit another researchers to repeat the research for further advancement, keeping the continuity of what has already been attained. And the procedural design of the research should be carefully planned to yield results that are as objective as possible. The researcher should report with complete frankness flaws in procedural design and estimate their effects upon the findings. The analysis of data should be sufficiently adequate to reveal its significance, and the methods of analysis used should be appropriate. The validity and reliability of the data should be checked carefully, and conclusion should be confined to those justified by the data of the research and limited to those for which the data provide an adequate basis. And the last is the 7. Greater confidence in research is warranted if the researcher is experienced, has a good reputation in research, and is a person of integrity. And in other words, we can state the qualities of good research as a good research in systematic, good research in logical, good research is empirical, and good research in replicable. Good research is systematic. It means that research is organized into steps that must be completed in specific order according to a set of guidelines. Good research is logical. This means that research is driven by logical reasoning norms, and the logical process of induction and deduction are extremely useful in doing research. And 3 is a good research is empirical. It suggests that research is primarily concerned with one or more parts of genuine scenario and deals with the solid data that serves as a foundation for the research external validity. And the good research is replicable means that this property enables research findings to be confirmed by reproducing the study, resulting in a solid foundation for the decision making. Thank you.